My dad canceled my room at the Aspen resort and texted, "Sleep outside." I smiled and replied, "Check your balance." His face must have gone pale. 10 minutes later, his frantic apologies flooded my phone, but the accounts were already frozen. My name is Vanessa. I am 35, and the message reached me as I stood in the freezing cold outside the luxury ski chalet I had paid for. Stranded in the snow, I realized the family I was supporting had just made a catastrophic error. Have you ever felt like the invisible bank account in your own family? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. Bypassing tears, I opened my laptop in the middle of the Denver Airport Transit Lounge and executed a methodical financial purge. I didn't ask why. I just started clicking cancel. I navigated to my booking app. The $12,000 luxury Aspen ski chalet reservation was sitting right there, prepaid under my name. I canceled it, recalling the refund directly to my card. Next, I opened my banking portal. For years, I had been the silent investor in their version of family. Now, I realized it had been a subscription, with me footing the bill. The $18,000 per semester auto draft for my younger sister Morgan's medical school tuition was scheduled for next week. I halted the transfer immediately. The $25,000 seed deposit for my brother Julian's supposed tech startup was sitting in a holding account. I pulled it back. Finally, I located the recurring $4,500 monthly payment that covered my parents' mortgage. I stopped that, too. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. Sitting under the fluorescent terminal lights, I finally understood the trap of normalized cruelty. They hadn't started out demanding everything. It had happened slowly, month by month, year by year. Because I was a senior actuary, because I was careful and stable, they gradually stopped viewing my income as my own hard-earned money. They began treating my financial stability as a shared family utility, a public fountain they could drink from whenever they pleased. My independence was never celebrated. It was harvested. They normalized exploiting me because I had never let them fall. I had absorbed their irresponsibility to keep the peace, but peace that costs your dignity is just extortion. They thought stranding me at the airport would make me feel powerless. Instead, it made me realize how massive my leverage actually was. I refused to let my hard work be the foundation for their entitlement any longer. I closed my laptop, packed my carry-on, and walked toward the exit. I didn't have a flight to Aspen anymore, but I had something much better. I had absolute financial control. My family was currently soaring at 30,000 feet, completely unaware that the safety net beneath them had just been permanently removed. I ordered a car to take me to a comfortable downtown hotel. The ride gave me time to review the ledgers I kept for my own records. Looking at the columns of numbers, the sheer volume of my contributions over the past decade was staggering. It wasn't just the big-ticket items. It was the constant, quiet subsidizing of their lifestyles. I had funded the illusion of their success while they treated me as an afterthought. It is a terrifying realization when you discover the people who are supposed to protect you are actually the ones holding you hostage. I checked into my hotel and set my phone aside. Let them arrive in Aspen and find out exactly what happens when the invisible bank account closes its doors. This sudden severance wasn't born out of nowhere. It was the direct consequence of a demand made 2 weeks prior. My father, Gregory, owned a logistics company in Seattle. For years, he projected the image of a titan of industry, a self-made man. But the reality was vastly different. 2 weeks ago, he had invited me to his office and slid a stack of loan documents across his mahogany desk. He demanded that I use my home equity to guarantee a high-risk $250,000 commercial expansion loan. As a senior actuary, my job is to evaluate risk, identify catastrophic vulnerabilities, and prevent financial ruin. I read through the terms, and the numbers were glaringly toxic. The interest rates were predatory, the collateral requirements were absurd, and his company's cash flow projections were entirely fictional. I looked him in the eye and said no. I explained the immense risk to my own assets. He didn't hear logic. He only heard defiance. In his mind, my wealth was his asset to deploy. When I refused to sign the guarantee, he decided I needed to be punished. He orchestrated this entire Aspen family vacation under the guise of a bonding experience. But it was a trap. Since he insisted on booking the family itinerary to control the schedule, he had the access to cancel my connecting flight while I was walking to the gate, a calculated move to humble me into submission. He wanted to strip away my autonomy, strand me in an unfamiliar airport, and force me to beg for his help. He believed a few hours of panic would remind me that I needed my family, and that family acceptance mattered more than financial caution. He expected me to panic, buy a new ticket, arrive in Aspen apologizing, and blindly sign his loan documents to restore the peace. He severely miscalculated. He forgot that numbers do not have emotions, and neither did I when faced with betrayal. For over 10 years, I had been the unappreciated financial backbone holding them all upright. I remembered paying Valerie's exorbitant credit card bills when Gregory's logistics business had a slow quarter. I remembered quietly funding Julian's lifestyle while he played the visionary tech founder, never producing a single viable product. I remembered covering Morgan's medical school expenses so she wouldn't have to take out loans. I had sacrificed my own peace of mind to ensure theirs. And how did they repay me? By deliberately leaving me behind. The airport abandonment wasn't just a prank. It was a hostile takeover attempt of my life. They wanted to break my spirit to access my capital. But I am an actuary. I assess, I calculate, and I mitigate risk. And my family had just proven themselves to be the highest liability I had ever encountered. I systematically archived the canceled reservations, the banking logs, and the walk-home text. I compiled a digital dossier of my retaliation. This wasn't revenge. It was a necessary systemic audit. And I was about to enforce a strict zero-tolerance policy. I finalized my timeline of events, ensuring every financial string was cleanly severed. I would no longer be the foundation for their house of cards. The consequences of my audit hit them the moment they touched down. With the luxury chalet canceled and the funds securely back in my account, Gregory and Valerie found themselves standing in Aspen with expensive luggage and nowhere to go. During peak season, finding last-minute lodging was nearly impossible. They spent a miserable night in a cheap, outdated motel, stripped of the luxury they felt entitled to. Instead of recognizing their mistake, Gregory and Valerie doubled down on their toxicity. They booked flights back to my home city of Seattle the very next morning. They didn't return to apologize. They returned to wage war. On Tuesday morning, I was sitting in my office at the actuarial firm. It is a high-security corporate building, a place of quiet professionalism. Suddenly, the chaos arrived. Gregory and Valerie ambushed me right in the lobby of my firm. Gregory didn't pull me aside for a quiet conversation. He amplified his voice. He started yelling, creating a loud public scene designed to weaponize professional embarrassment. He shouted that my emotional outburst was ruining the family. He demanded that I immediately reinstate the mortgage payments and Julian's seed funding. He ranted about respect, duty, and how I was abandoning my own blood over a harmless joke. Several of my colleagues stopped to watch. The lobby echoed with his demands. This was his escalation. He believed that if he humiliated me in front of my peers, if he threatened my professional reputation, I would crumble. He thought I would frantically agree to pay whatever he wanted just to make the scene stop. It was a classic intimidation tactic. Create a crisis, manufacture public shame, and extort compliance. Valerie chimed in, weeping dramatically, begging me not to let them default on the mortgage and ruin their credit. She told the gathered onlookers that I was punishing them financially because I was unstable. They were putting on a theatrical performance of victimhood. They weren't shocked by what they had done at the airport. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along. I looked at Gregory. I didn't yell back. I didn't defend myself to the murmuring crowd. I stood perfectly still, letting his tantrum wash over me without absorbing a single drop of his manufactured panic. "You are embarrassing yourself, Gregory," I said, my voice cold and flat, cutting through his shouting. "And you have vastly overestimated your leverage. I refuse to let my workplace become a stage for their extortion. Let the onlookers whisper. Let them judge." I knew the ledger was balanced in my favor. I did not flinch, and I did not negotiate. The days of me sacrificing my professional and personal dignity to appease their demands were completely over. I was a senior actuary, and I knew precisely how to manage a hostile threat. They wanted a public surrender, but they were about to get a very clinical, very permanent eviction. I stared at them, watching the desperation mask itself as authority. Gregory pointed a finger at me, demanding I fix the mess I had created. He wanted me to be small, to cower under the weight of his disapproval. But the corporate lobby wasn't his kingdom. It was my territory. I had earned my place here through relentless hard work, while he was merely a loud, disruptive guest. I crossed my arms and waited for him to run out of breath. The silence that followed his shouting was heavy and final. I looked directly at the building security personnel who had rushed over. "These individuals are trespassing," I stated clearly and calmly. "Please escort them out and permanently revoke any future visitor access." Gregory's mouth fell open. He had expected me to negotiate. He had not expected a total, emotionless ejection. Security officers moved in seamlessly, flanking my parents and directing them toward the revolving doors. Gregory shouted threats over his shoulder, but the heavy glass doors quickly silenced him. I went straight back to my office. The personal family drama was over. The professional escalation had begun. I picked up my phone and called my Aunt Cynthia. She was the only voice of reason in our family tree. I enlisted her to act as my sole communication buffer. I had my lawyer draft a formal cease and desist letter terminating all voluntary financial support and asked Cynthia to deliver it to them. With the perimeter secured, I turned my attention to the numbers. I needed to dig into past financial ties to insulate my credit from Gregory's logistics business. I initiated a deep forensic review of historical financial records I had shared with my parents. To convince me to sign that loan guarantee, Gregory had arrogantly given me temporary access to his corporate accounting portal, assuming I wouldn't look past the top-line revenue. It took hours of pulling records, cross-referencing bank statements, and tracking the corporate filings for his company. That was when I found it, the shell game. I uncovered massive, glaring discrepancies hidden deep within the logistics company's ledgers. Gregory's business wasn't failing due to a tough economy. The money wasn't missing. It had been moved. Gregory had been secretly and systematically siphoning operating capital for years. He had been draining the corporate accounts to fund Morgan and Julian's lavish, entitled lifestyles. He was paying for luxury cars, designer wardrobes, and high-end vacations using business funds. The $250,000 loan request wasn't for commercial expansion. It was a desperate cover-up. It was a frantic attempt to plug the gaping hole in his accounts before his creditors discovered the massive corporate fraud. The airport punishment wasn't just a petty lesson in respect to force me to guarantee a business loan. It was a calculated, sociopathic move to break my boundaries and force me into becoming the sole financial pillar holding up their fraudulent facade. They needed my pristine credit and high income to mask a criminal enterprise. The revelation washed over me, cold and absolute. They weren't just ungrateful. They were running a financial scam, and they intended to make me the fall guy. I gathered the evidence, downloaded every fraudulent transfer record, and compiled a lethal dossier. The game was entirely over. I secured the files in an encrypted folder. I had always suspected their financial mismanagement, but seeing the undeniable proof of criminal embezzlement shifted the paradigm completely. I was no longer just protecting my peace. I was protecting myself from being legally entangled in their impending financial ruin. The sheer arrogance of their plan was astounding. They truly believed that blood ties gave them immunity from consequence. But a parasite cannot survive when the host recognizes the infection. The criminal twist changed everything. Days later, Gregory demanded a family dinner at their exclusive country club in Seattle. He wanted to reassert control and corner me into surrendering my money. I attended with Aunt Cynthia by my side. Gregory had reserved a private dining room where Valerie, Morgan, and Julian were already seated. Gregory stood at the head of the table, projecting the image of absolute authority. He began with a condescending lecture, threatening to socially isolate and permanently disown me if I did not immediately restore the payments and guarantee his loan. I didn't interrupt. I let him finish his hollow speech. Then, I executed the ultimate power flip. I simply reached into my briefcase and dropped the printed forensic audit files directly onto the mahogany table. "I am not here to negotiate a surrender," I said. "I am here to show you your own balance sheet." I pushed the highlighted bank statements toward Morgan and Julian. I watched their eyes widen as they saw the records of corporate funds illegally transferred to their personal accounts. I exposed the entire embezzlement scheme right in front of the family. I laid out the exact math of his fraud, detailing how the $250,000 loan was a desperate attempt to cover his theft. The illusion of his power shattered instantly. Gregory's authoritarian posture collapsed into pathetic begging. The color drained from his face as he realized I had uncovered the criminal truth. This is the profound illusion of power from an empty wallet. For years, Gregory had commanded the family through fear and financial dominance. But true power comes from character, integrity, and actual solvency. His artificial hierarchy was a ghost, a facade funded entirely by stolen money and my own hard work. Once the funding was stripped away, the rapid collapse of his authoritarian dominance was inevitable. A man who relies on his victim to lease his lifestyle possesses no real power. Stripped of his secrets, he had nothing left. The family instantly turned on each other. Valerie began screaming at Gregory for risking their reputation. Julian and Morgan panicked, realizing their endless gravy train was tied to corporate fraud. Gregory abandoned his threats and pleaded with me to keep the files quiet, promising that things would change. He was a broken man, terrified of prison. I looked at the people who had stranded me in Denver. This wasn't revenge, I told them coldly. It was accounting, and your accounts are closed. I turned and walked out of the country club with Cynthia. The heavy oak doors of the private dining room closed behind us, muffling the sounds of their vicious infighting. I felt no pity. I only felt the clean, crisp satisfaction of an equation perfectly balanced. I had unmasked their entire operation, and I walked away, leaving them to face the absolute wreckage of their own making. Their entitlement had blinded them to the reality that I was the one holding the pen. They thought they could manipulate an actuary with emotional blackmail, forgetting that I make a living dissecting risk and exposing liabilities. The country club, with its chandeliers and expensive menus, was the perfect backdrop for their total collapse. They were bankrupt in every conceivable way, and I was finally free. Absolute justice takes its course without requiring any further intervention from me. Once the financial tap was permanently shut off, gravity did the rest. Gregory's logistics business faced total ruin without my capital to hide his embezzlement. When his creditors inevitably audited the corporate accounts, the devastating fraud was exposed. He lost the company, and the severe legal and financial fallout consumed his life. Valerie was forced to rapidly downsize her lifestyle, taking a menial receptionist job just to survive. Without the $18,000 auto draft, Morgan could not afford her elite medical school tuition. She was forced to take out heavy student loans and work grueling night shifts, finally experiencing the crushing reality of debt that I had shielded her from. Julian's fake tech startup dissolved overnight when the seed money vanished. He had to abandon his coffee shop networking and get a minimum wage retail job. They were all forced to live within their actual means. Meanwhile, I systematically insulated my wealth. I worked closely with my lawyers to update my estate documents, establishing ironclad trusts that permanently barred my parents and siblings from ever accessing a single cent of my assets. I finalized the strict no-contact orders. They were legally and financially erased from my existence. A month later, I took a peaceful solo retreat to a luxury chalet in Aspen, booking the exact trip they had tried to steal from me. Sitting on the balcony, looking out over the magnificent snow-capped mountains, I felt a profound sense of freedom. The permanent death of my marriage, a casualty of their endless financial exploitation and the isolation of starting over, was a heavy price, but it was one I was willing to pay. For years, I was just an invisible utility to them. But now, my worth is fully recognized. By stepping away from the altar of family obligation, I reclaimed my dignity, my autonomy, and my future. The airport kiosk in Denver was supposed to be the site of my ultimate humiliation. Instead, it was the birthplace of a quiet, composed liberation. They told me to walk home, so I did. I just chose a home where none of them had the key. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need the courage to enforce their own boundaries. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on setting firm boundaries with family.